The word aesthetics, it means a set of principles concerned with the nature and appreciation of beauty, especially in art. I'd like to believe it's the visual presentation of ourselves, or even a product or an art piece. It's a cohesive collection of our thoughts, what we like, what we want, and what we want to present to the world, whether it's in our fashion style, the different kinds of strokes, or how light or dark we would like our paintings to be, our branding, the way our music sounds, and the user interfaces we create. And believe it or not, even the angles in our photography. It affects our long-term attitude about products or even people. It matters mostly in art and design because not only does it make the first impression, but also strengthens the bond between the observer or user. Welcome to the Creative Monologue. I am your mentor, Gia Almuaili, and in this week's episode, I'll be talking about aesthetics, what it is, the philosophy behind it, as well as how you can find your own personal aesthetic. Aesthetics is the philosophical branch of inquiry concerned with beauty, art, and perception. From its philosophic roots in ancient Greece, where thinkers like Socrates and Plato who considered it the inherent meaning and beauty of things, aesthetics is also used to refer to the critique of art and design. The word aesthetics derives from the ancient Greek word asthenomai, which means perception by the senses. As such, it's used in modern English as a noun, in the same sense that something can appeal to the senses. Since the meaning of the word relies upon sensory perception, its definition is fluid, varying through time, and it's subjective, differing between people and cultures. In a more general sense, aesthetics as a philosophy refers to the study of sensory values. This means that judgment or evaluation by the senses and through time has come to refer to critical and philosophical thought about art, culture, and or nature. A subfield of axiology, the philosophy of art, aesthetics is interested in ways of seeing and sensing the world. As a field of study, on the other hand, aesthetics involves ways of seeing and perceiving the world. In a contemporary sense, it can be used to reference a particular style or design. For example, a culture that uses floral motifs through many areas of design and function can be said to appreciate or adhere to a specific aesthetic. As a critical study, aesthetics assumes an ability to judge on a sensory level, as well as a collective agreement about ideals of beauty. The philosopher Immanuel Kant distinguished between an object's ability to be agreeable to one person, as it is in line with personal taste, while not conforming to more widely held notions of beauty. In this analysis, beauty is a more actual quality than a mere opinion. A philosophy of aesthetics can be drawn back to the early works of Plato, in which the classic Greek thinker supposed that all things of sensory beauty are imitations of the perfect form of their objectivity. In this view, each thing that belongs to a category, for example, the category of flower, imitates the most perfect form of flower that exists only in idea. And the closer the object comes to the perfect form, the more aesthetically pleasing it is. Immanuel Kant summarizes the individual aspect of many aesthetic judgments when he says that a man will not argue if another tells him that something is pleasing to him, rather than pleasing in and of itself. For Kant, aesthetic value, like everything else, does not hold beauty or truth in objects, but rather in definitions. This means that the rose itself is not beautiful. It is beautiful when one decides and views it in such, and society in general agrees, making beauty a property rather than an opinion. From the Kantian perspective, the beauty of the thing is the recognition of a truth that is both universal and subjective. Other philosophers have tried to create a set of criteria with which to evaluate beauty, including analytical thinkers like Edmund Burke, who suggested that beauty includes 6 basic principles of design: variety, uniformity, simplicity, intricacy, and magnitude. The 21st century and the advent of postmodern theory have brought new attitudes towards aesthetic interpretation. In this view, theorists confront the assumption that beauty is central to either art or aesthetics. Postmodern views of aesthetics are more interested in the raw, emotional, and experience of art, rather than what it means. In a sense, postmodern aesthetics return the word to its sensory roots, interested not in a philosophized understanding of one universal aesthetic and artistic presentation, but in investing the depth of the aesthetic experience in the experience itself. Postmodern aesthetics are ultimately interested in the condition or state of being, than in any one privileged master narrative. As a result, postmodern art and design use familiar objects in unexpected ways, encouraging the experience of aesthetic interpretation that doesn't coincide with the narrative of forms. For example, since Plato and his theory of forms would have argued that a chair is a chair because it resembles the form of a chair, a postmodernist would assert that anything can be sat on is a chair, thus fulfilling function, and that anything traditionally defined as a chair can be used in a myriad of ways. For example, as a coat rack or a ladder or a bookshelf, thus complexifying the previous notion of form and with its singular aesthetic judgment. The great civilizations of history, the Mesopotamian, Persian, Chinese, Indian, Roman, Egyptian, and Greek, were all centers of unique styles of art and design that contributed towards the modern understanding of art and the contemporary theory of aesthetic philosophy. One can watch the interpretations of fluid aesthetic through time through the artistic representation of the human physical form. Dating to early Greek sculptures and drawings, the human form has provided a timeless model for the cultivation and evolution of art and aesthetics. Features like proportion and accurate representation are used as an unchanging baseline through time, allowing artists and aesthetic periods to deviate from imitation and interpretation. Aesthetic similarities in different cultures are also observable in the artistic representation of the human form. The universality of some aesthetic qualities are observed in the recognition of many human facial expressions across cultures. In innate ways, humans appear to share some aesthetic judgments on a primal or instinctual level. Similarly, certain things cause similar reactions across cultures, such as objects of disgust or objects of pleasure, which support a theory of shared human perspective. As with all things human, there will always be deviations from rules, revealing that much of art and life is judged on an individual level. Cultural norms and societal values also influence accepted aesthetic judgments. In artistic works, the female form has seen several incarnations expressing societal expectations. In some cultures and some eras, curvaceousness and ample flesh are appreciated as symbols of beauty and prosperity. In these depictions, a woman's health and reproductive strength are imparted through the shape of her form, also implying wealth and status. In other eras and cultures, the female form is most appreciated slender or well-toned, implying wealth and privilege in another time. Physical beauty, of course, differs according to local cultures. Aesthetics as a philosophy is differently understood in the postmodern era, and many thinkers now refuse to accept dominant theories of beauty or art. Instead, expression and experience, in the moment, are the aesthetic. However, as a field of study, a discussion continues about the meaning of art, beauty, and meaning itself. Different aesthetic values are found in varied cultures around the world that have been nurtured by diverse natural environments, cultural norms, and moral foundations. In India, for instance, aesthetic value has evolved through the interpretation and representation of spiritual and religious iconography. In India, art and relationships between the physical and the spiritual states are manifested in many types of expressions, including paintings, sculpture, literature, dance, architecture, and music. Indian creation stories and other spiritual myths are repeatedly portrayed across the genre of art and life, and the resemblance of life and love to these stories are imbued with aesthetic beauty. In Chinese history, aesthetics were a more intellectual pursuit, with thinkers like Confucius dedicating himself to the study of art and human nature. As a result, classical Chinese art occurs largely independently of the philosophy of aesthetics and religion. In the Islamic traditions, there is a long-running debate about producing representational art. Those opposed to the artistic expression of natural forms argue that since God created all things perfectly, human imitation is weak. As a result, most works we see in the Islamic world are beautiful, non-representational art, including mosaics, floral motifs, mosques, and calligraphy, genres in which artistic and aesthetic tendencies can flourish without incurring theological wrath. In contrast, in many Christian art traditions, creating imitation of God's creation was viewed as a homage and worship. Many great artists have used the inspiration of God, heaven, and hell as the foundation of their aesthetic expression, glorifying the aesthetic beauty of the transcendent realm. While aesthetics are traditionally related to the critical evaluation of arts and beauty, the use of appeal and attraction work in many areas of human life. Since aesthetic qualities are experienced by the senses, a pleasing environment can be said to influence people on an unconscious level. With the growth of modern industry, people and cultures have enjoyed a greater ease of living, allowing more attention to go into the detail and design of many facets of life. Aesthetics are at work in all areas of modern life, from the seemingly simple artifact of everyday living to the self-professed complexities of architecture and design. In modern parlance, such practical renditions of the philosophy of art are often referred to as applied aesthetics. In fields like medicine and mathematics, applied aesthetics are often used to translate English language terms through other languages with the use of form. In modern Western society, aesthetics are used in the production of advertising with massive and overwhelming success. Images that convey luxury, success, and opulence dominate media, and suggest that through the acquisition of the featured product or service, the consumer will enjoy a coveted lifestyle. In this modern culture, sexuality is another highly marketed aesthetic. Almost unrelated to the product or service, images of beautiful people make for effective advertising. The use of beauty expressed as symmetry is common in the design of buildings, houses, and more recently cities. Taking into account the entire sensory life of human beings, contemporary urban planning, architecture, and landscape design all have an eye for that aesthetic. In this sense, modern design is interested in the shape of a city, house, or park for more than its function. We are also interested in form and the expression of both meaning and beauty in our surroundings. Aesthetics are an integral part of the human experience, at least as a perception of beauty in art. Whether or not one develops a thorough understanding of aesthetics as a philosophy, we encounter objects of beauty and perceive them as such. Contemporary aesthetics defy a universal rule, arguing that there is no singular definition of beauty or art, but rather that both can be found and experienced in the moment by the observer. This week's Honorable Creative is Mads Folkman. Mads Folkman is an Associate Professor of Design Theory, Design Culture, and Design History in the Department of Design and Communication at the University of Southern Denmark. His main research interests are the aesthetic of design, design as a basic condition and phenomenon of modern culture, the philosophy of design, and the role of imagination in design. Recently, his work focuses on the role and impact of digital technology on design. In taking the concept of aesthetics as a starting point, he explores how contemporary design reflects and is affected by the pervasive digital technology. In developing a theory of post-material aesthetics, Folkman aims to conceptualize the role of aesthetics for design in design culture in relations to questions of ontology, materiality, and the cultural context of design. Ultimately, his goal is to understand how design is changing due to digital technology and accordingly how culture is changing as well. He has a background in the humanities and has written the books The Aesthetics of Imagination and Design, which I have recently read and will be discussing briefly today. In The Aesthetics of Imagination and Design, Folkman explores the differences between aesthetics in design versus aesthetics in art. Folkman argues that design objects will always be a dual phenomena, material and immaterial, sensual and conceptual, actual and possible. Drawing on formal theories of aesthetics and the phenomenology of imagination, he seeks to answer fundamental questions about what aesthetics of design is and how it works that are often ignored in academic research. Folkman considers three platforms in design aesthetics through which design objects communicate: the sensual, phenomenological platform, the conceptual, hermeneutical platform, and the contextual, discursive platform. That being said, as creatives, we need to ask ourselves, why is aesthetics so important? I believe that aesthetics is what makes us human. It increases our questioning and reasoning capability. It makes us aware of the fine line between what is good and what is not in the creative field. Traditionally, it comes together with art and is almost impossible to separate the two. In design, on the other hand, aesthetics is an entry point to our basic axis of experience. It gives an emotional value to design. When talking about the differences between art and design when it comes to aesthetics, think about it this way. Design is much more motivated by some purpose. It has a specific target user group. Sometimes functionality has a higher precedence over aesthetics. Art, on the other hand, doesn't need to have that dimension of functionality. It can just be an expression of an artist or portrayal of personal feelings or just a mere form of an entertainment. When looking at the similarities between aesthetics in art and in design, it is important to keep in mind that aesthetics is an integral element of the two. It is relational and depends on the subject and object. An object here can be aesthetically coded by a designer, artist, and perceived with equal rigor by a user or observer having aesthetic perception. The approach to investigate aesthetics in art and design can be the same. I'm going to share a few examples by applying Folkman's framework to art and design to help you better understand similarities in aesthetics between the two fields. First off, in the sensual phenomenological platform, both art and design can have a specific form and appearance that mediates aesthetic communication between the artist and designer, and the observer and user. That challenges experience and understanding of things. A good example of this would be a railway clock. It's designed in such a way that has a definite form and appearance. It is functional, yet it challenges our understanding of the concept of time. In a way, the railway clock can be considered a critical design, usable but not useful. In the second example, think of eggshell sculpting. It is a form of art that is clearly not usable, but it manages to challenge our understanding of eggshells through its form and appearance. Moving on to the conceptual hermeneutical platform, and in that both art and design can be staged. As Folkman puts it, a design reflects the meaning through its actual presence and unfolding in a physical setting by means of sensual aspects of forms, material, and color. A classic example would be the Brillo boxes. One of the reasons Brillo boxes became such a successful design is because of its staging. There were certain aesthetic elements associated with the way Brillo boxes were presented to the public. Think of white backgrounds, fancy photography techniques, placements, or if you want a newer example, think of the way wedding invitations in the wedding industry are being designed, styled, and presented in such a way using form, materials, and colors to seem aesthetically pleasing, versus paintings in a museum. Their arrangements and ambience adds a layer of aesthetic coating to the environment. Paintings as a piece of art are thoughtfully presented in a way that they themselves seem to be wanting to be perceived aesthetically by subjects. Finally, the contextual discursive platform, which constitutes distribution of aesthetics in everyday life. As pointed out by Folkman, aesthetics has its capacity for creating and constructing meaning on the level of society. It is ubiquitous and non-circumventable. The Coca-Cola neon signs, for instance, have an effect on the cityscape and emit messages of desire and hope. It speaks to the desires of people, therefore aesthetics has ethical implications similar to design. Like design, aesthetics are political. They define environmental ecology, enhance boundaries of understanding and meaning-making for people. Now think of street graffiti. Graffiti is slowly becoming an upcoming public art form that adds aesthetics to the environment, as they use public space and therefore become a part of everyday life of local people. Thus, as per my understanding, the role of aesthetics played in design and art is more or less the same. Aesthetics becomes the highest priority in both fields. So, is there a difference between aesthetics of art and design, and is it possible to appropriate design by aesthetics of art? And can we define the essence of aesthetics in art and apply it to design? Maybe, but according to Folkman, design aesthetics have additional parameters of being functional, informational, and contextual. And design is not an expression of an artist, but rather the result of complex commercial and societal processes. Here is where I personally believe the lines of aesthetics in design and art gets blurred. In my opinion, there can be the same parameters of functional, informational, and contextual in the art field too, and maybe they are not so prominent, or maybe they are. In the end, it's up to the creative to decide where it lies in their work. Okay, everybody, so for today's homework, I want you to find your own aesthetic. And if you're a creative, say you're a designer or an artist, a musician, and even if you're an entrepreneur who wants to start their own brand or business, it is very crucial to define your aesthetic or your brand's aesthetic. Defining it may or may not take much time, but I have a few questions for you to answer to help ease the process. Okay, grab a piece of paper and write these questions down. Step 1. Defining yourself. To find your aesthetic, you need to first discover or rediscover who you are. And here are some questions for thought. What do you like? What do you dislike? Describe your personality. What do you love about yourself? What does your ideal day look like? List 5 unique things about yourself that no one else knows. And how do you want people to feel around you? Finally, list some words or quotes that you admire and love. Step 2. Defining your inspirations. My aesthetic and who I am is largely influenced by a collection of inspiring materials and persons. Who are your inspirations? Consider this: fictional characters, personalities, fashion icons, ideal lifestyles, wardrobes, and even, again, quotes. Step 3. Create a mood board. Yes, mood boards are not only made for brands and products. You can create a mood board for yourself. Curating a mood board is my favorite way to see what I like and want clearly. I like to use Pinterest and make a private board for re-evaluating my aesthetic. Some ideas of what to pin is go through the things you like, and list and pin accordingly. Imagine your ideal lifestyle. How do you want to spend your mornings, and trips you want to take, hobbies you want to try, and how does your ideal home and bedroom look like? Think about the colors, the fabrics in your room. Furthermore, what clothes and outfits are you drawn to? Pin those too. Pin scenes from films and TV shows that inspire you, or even arts and quotes that make you feel how you always want to feel. And add images with colors that speak to your soul. And voila, you are looking at a visual representation of you. Moving on to step 4 is curate. Now, you're in touch with what you like and why and how you want to live your life. The key to a cohesive and strong aesthetic is being able to curate. To curate means to select, organize, and present. We have selected our visual inspirations and now we organize. Start unpinning things that don't belong. Maybe you pinned a lot of images of outfits, but there's that one outfit that just does not belong. Maybe your Pinterest board is very consistent with specific colors, but there's just one pin that just does not fit the color scheme. This doesn't mean your aesthetic limits you, but simply you are learning how to present your interest and loves in a way that is organized and cohesive. Try finding the same ideas in a different image that does belong. The process will help you to truly understand your aesthetic. Soon you'll see consistent colors and consistent patterns and consistent content that you like and admire. And finally, step 5, to present. Now there are 2 things. In real life, by letting this curation phase spill into all aspects of your life, let it inspire you to achieve the bedroom you want, to donate the clothing you own that you don't see yourself wearing anymore. You're just outlined what makes you happy and what makes you feel like your best self. So let that take over. It's okay to want to reinvent yourself to the person you want to be. Don't be ashamed of that. And don't forget our first step, the definition of you. Be your biggest inspiration. I'm not done yet. Moving on from real life to digital, if you want, that is totally up to you. You also want your digital life to kind of speak volumes as well. So I better talk about your aesthetic on social if you're active. Be yourself online. Remember your personality, what makes you unique, and also consider how you want people to feel when they look at your images or your profile, and read your words that you share. I know that sounds cheesy, but that also counts if you want to take part in that. Thank you everyone for listening to today's podcast. I hope today's topic was helpful and informative. Tune in next week where I'll be discussing how being a little bit like jazz can actually make us more creative. This is your mentor and host, Gia Almuaili. Have a lovely rest of your day or evening wherever you are in the world, and don't forget to stay creative.